early childhood development. Each week we talk about a different stage of children development and what children need. And now, here comes your host.
Hello, everybody, and welcome. My name is Taryn, and you are listening to The Parenting. We are in week 3 of having a chat with Marion, and I'm calling this the road to the inner child. So we are on the road, we are getting there, and we have had such amazing conversations. We are going to do a quick recap this week, but if you have not yet listened to the first and second episodes in this series, please do go back and listen before listening to this one, because it will all make sense when you have the previous information. Before we do get started and welcome Marion in, I had a few disclaimers last week, and I'm going to run through them again this week because we are having sensitive conversations and there are things that may come up that would make you feel a little bit uncomfortable as you realize how you were raised or how you are raising your children. But it's very important to remember that these episodes and the content of these episodes is not to condemn you. It's to make you aware, it's to bring awareness, to create awareness, and then to pivot and move onto a healthier path of raising yourself or being gentle with yourself as well as raising your children. So if some hard realizations come to the surface here, please be gentle with yourself. Marion, welcome. Welcome back.
Hi, Taryn. Well, hi, Taryn, and good to be back. And yes, I do think a lot of ahas happened for me as a parent myself and as a person myself when I started doing this research. And I can only endorse your advice that as there's ahas, some of them very uncomfortable, come. It's really important to be gentle with yourself. You were doing the best you could with the information that you had at the time, as were your parents. And we're just trying to improve that information so you can do a better job. So it's not about criticizing yourself, but rather recognizing perhaps that there are ways you could do things better. And that's really what this is all about.
Absolutely. Can I ask you to do a quick recap of what we've covered so far in the last 2 weeks?
Well, we spoke about the fact that there's not just an inner child, but there's an inner parent and also an inner adult. And in fact, how we function in the world is by using those ego states, as they're called in the mapping system known as transactional analysis, that helps us to understand how we experience life, right? And the important thing, and why we're doing this on a show called The Parent Thing, is because how we're parented creates our internal guidance system. And that's what we use. Those are our factory settings that we use basically to function in the world for the rest of our lives. Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of important that parents know what they're doing as best they can. You know, I think it's such a scary thing that parenting is probably the most responsible job with the most profound impact that we ever do in our lives. And yet it's the thing we have the least training for. And so you and I both share a desire, having been children growing up in dysfunctional homes. We're really hoping to try and help parents do a better job than our parents were able to do for us. And certainly that I was even able to do for my own child. And in a kind of weird way, this is my version of an amends to my child. I can't fix my child's history, but I can take what I've come to understand and help other parents do a better job than I was able to do. I'm very glad that at least my child and I are still friends, but there was some stuff he needed to forgive me for.
Yeah. So let's get into the meat of this week's chat. Last week, we spoke about the nurturing role of the parent and mistakes that nurturing parents make. So this week, we are going to focus on the guiding role of the parent and mistakes that the guider, for lack of a better term, makes. So can you take us into what the role of the guiding parent is? Like, what does it look like when it's a healthy guiding parent?
Yes. In the conventional labeling of transactional analysis, it's normally referred to as the critical or controlling parent. And that doesn't mean negative, right? Because sometimes, discernment, constructive criticism, in constructive control is a positive thing. But I prefer that label, guiding parents. So I'm going to stay with that one because I think that's better. So you have these two aspects: the nurturing parent, who is concerned with your beingness and who is the one who shows you how to take care of yourself by how they take care of you. And then this guiding, so your nurturing parent loves you for who you are. And then your guiding parent is the one that teaches you the functional aspects of how to operate in this particular concrete jungle, whichever version it happens to be. And they do that by several things: how they themselves model how to do it. So children are programmed to watch and copy. So if you want to show a child how to do something, do it in front of them repeatedly, and they will watch you and they will copy you. But then there's also rewarding and punishment. So this is the parent who loves us for what we do. Now, obviously, all parents do both. They do nurturing and guiding. But we're talking about the function rather than the individual. So it's the role that we're discussing. So we have to become aware that as a guiding parent, you're both demonstrating this is how to do it.
Yeah.
And you are acknowledging what they're doing and responding to it either positively or negatively. Okay.
I remember being about maybe 7 or 8 years old, and my dad used to drop me off at church on a Sunday morning and then come back and pick me up. And I remember asking him, why are you making me go to church, but you are not going to church? Now, my dad was very militant, very strict, and like, what I say is what I say, right? And he was like, do as I say, don't do as I do. Okay. And I feel like so many of us were raised with this kind of dissonance because it's the nature of a child to do what they see. So to be told to do what is being said and not what we are seeing, that creates a bit of a dissonance because that's not how a child learns. And so I believe that there's a lot of generations that are a generation of do as I say, don't do as I do, that were raised that way. Can you go into what modeling behavior versus giving orders, like why it's important that you model the behaviors versus giving the orders?
Well, there are a couple of points. Let's start first of all with the fact that humans are the most amazingly adaptable species, but we're incredibly adaptable because we take so long to mature. It takes us 25 to mature, for our brains to reach full adulthood. And we don't have the capacity for all sorts of things when we're little. That has to come with actual physical developmental maturity. And young children, for example, simply do not have the capacity for an abstract concept. They just don't. It's not there. So if you can't show them, they don't know what you're talking about. They have no idea. You're wasting your time telling them some abstract thing they've never seen. They need a concrete example. So words are literally just noise unless they've seen it done. So if you want them to learn, you have to show them. Now, teachers who are teaching young children know this. Tell the child to tie its shoelaces. If it hasn't seen somebody tie shoelaces, they will not even know where to start.
Right.
So telling them to do something doesn't have impact on a child the way that showing them does. Once they've seen it, once they've watched the movie a good few times and then had an opportunity to practice, only then do they get it. Okay, so watching the movie is the important thing, and you are the movie.
The movie.
As the parent, every single day of your life, how you interact with them and other people in your environment is what they will learn as how to do life. So if you don't want your kids to shout, don't shout in front of them, don't shout at them. If you don't want kids to hit, don't hit them, don't hit the people around them, right? Don't hit the dog if you don't want your kid to hit the dog, and so forth. In other words, they will copy you. So children behave like their parents. And sometimes that can be a bit embarrassing. I mean, if you've been a school teacher, you will know what's going on in that child's home because of how the child behaves.
Mm-hmm.
They're a little cameo of what's going on in that world, because that's what they do. They watch and they copy and they repeat. So that's the most important thing. You can become more abstract as the child grows older, but under the age of 9, don't waste your time. You have to show them.
Yeah.
And that dissonance that you're talking about happened to you when you were older, but you can't have an abstract conversation. I mean, it's like trying to have an abstract conversation with the cat. You can read them Shakespeare, but they're not going to know what you're going on about, and they're still going to talk in meow.
Right.
So don't bother. Just show them. So if you want them to go to church, you
Go
better
to
be going to
church
church,
with them. Right.
right? And if you want them to pat the dog and not hit it, don't hit the dog and pat the dog, and so forth. If you want them to be polite, best you be polite.
I think the modeling, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the modeling goes beyond the doing, but even the words, like what you say to your child, that's modeling what you believe of them, and then that's what they come to believe of themselves. So you get parents who say, oh, you're such an idiot, or leave it, you're never going to get it right. That type of thing is
Ooh.
modeling too, because it's creating a belief, because do you get what I'm saying?
Oh, that's actually a whole topic which I think we will cover
Yeah.
under the section called shaming that
Okay.
we will tackle. But I do think there's no question that parents need to set the example by how they interact with the child and how they interact with other people around them in front of the child. And that's the aspect of modeling. But reward and punishment, or as I would prefer to call it, okay, let's use the technical term of permissioning and injunctioning,
Okay.
because
So
that's the
that was going to
terminology
be
you need
my
to know
next
about.
question, is rewards and punishing. But
Mhm.
can we talk about the permissions and injunctions and how they encourage or discourage behavior? But can we start with like explaining what permissions are and what injunctions are?
Okay, well, let's start at the beginning of the parent role here. Guiding is done by how we respond, right? So what we respond to and how we respond, as well as what we model. So from a small baby. So for example, when a child's little, really baby, right? And it smiles, the parents get madly excited and smile back and ooh and coo and whatever at the child, right? And when the child cries, the parent responds differently, right? With a bit more anxiety and concern, okay? Or in some cases, as we mentioned previously, talking last week, with indifference, okay? Dr. Spock, as I said, has a lot to answer for. When we get enthusiastic, right, we are permissioning, we are endorsing, we are getting excited about it, and it encourages the child, okay? So when the child is learning to walk, we ignore the 423 times they fall. But when they take that first tottery step, we go mad. We get wildly excited. And it's quite interesting because as the children come in the family, first children tend to walk faster. Why? Because there's so much more enthusiasm for the process. And my husband's third brother actually only started walking when he was almost 3.
Mm.
Because by then his mum was overloaded. He was the 4th child, I think, and she was just too busy, and she couldn't have cared if he walked or didn't walk. There were other little ones who could do whatever, and that was it. There was no enthusiasm, so he just wasn't incentivized to walk the way his older siblings were. The novelty'd worn off for her, and she just, a certain degree of neglect.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. we're also like that when children say their first words. They get terribly excited when, a child says dada or mama for the first time, right? Lots of encouragement by not so much direct praise, but an enthusiastic response, a very positive reaction from the parent. But also, we will give a negative reaction. So when a child pulls your hair with, newly discovered fists, it doesn't know that it's hurting you, but by your reaction, it gets the message, you don't like that, right? If a child scratches or bites with new teeth, they have no awareness they are doing any hurt or harm, but they get a message from your reaction as you cry out, "Oh," right? Or, you pull away.
Mm-hmm.
So it's your response that tells them that's an injunction, a no to the behavior, a do not do this. So basically, it's the process of reinforcing either positively or negatively. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. Absolutely. So when we have permissions and we have injunctions and we now need to correct or guide behavior in the right direction, can we talk about how to do that? Like in my coaching course, I have a whole session on rewarding or discipline versus punishment. So rewarding versus punishing a child. Can we get into that? Like, what does rewards or what does discipline look like versus what does punishment look like?
Okay. Well, we could be here all day, but let's say an active negative response, in other words, an injunction, right?
Mm-hmm.
If it's done healthily, there's a negative response like the word no, usually a reaction physically, in other words, a frown or a reaction in the body. So your body language and your verbal reaction tend to match. Okay. And when it's done healthily, it's done for the benefit of the child. So, for example, if the child is about to stick its hand into the fire, a parent is going to respond with no, and then grab the child and pull it away and go, "Don't put your hand there. Can you see, sweetheart, it's hot and it will burn you." But the child doesn't understand the abstract concept that's being spoken.
Right.
But the response is as they put their hand into the fire, the parent's reaction, the tone of voice, the body language, and the moving the child away from the fire, okay, teaches the child this is a no, don't go there. Now, you wouldn't smack the child, and we'll get into hitting, right? But you would actively pull them away and go, no, you may not go there. This is bad.
So I think developmental stages, and that's a whole nother topic, but that plays a huge role here. Because if you telling, let's say a 1-year-old is walking towards this fire, and you tell the child, no, you're going to burn, da 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 da, the child doesn't understand that. So at
Not
that
at all.
age, you give the rule and you give the alternate, right? So the rule is no. That's the capacity that 1-year-old has, is the no. And when we get
Correct.
to the 3, 4, 5-year-old mark, they then understand what burn is. And so then you can bring the rule and the reason for the rule, right? So I feel like it's so important that parents understand where their children are developmentally, because I read a quote the other day. It could have been a book or it could have been a meme, I can't remember, but that parents talk too much when the kids are little and too little when the kids are older and can actually understand. And that's why there's like these relationship gaps and not correcting behavior appropriately, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you've covered so much there. Let me start at the beginning, I think, and work you through the role of the guiding parent and how it ideally works. And then we can talk about how it can go wrong.
Right.
So the first thing, and it's come up already, is that the parent needs to notice. So you can't do any guiding if you're not actually aware of what's going on. You can't permission and you can't injunction if you're not paying attention to the actual behavior. So then you need to respond appropriately, either with a permission. So first you notice, and then you respond, either with permission, enthusiasm, endorsement, well done, etc., or a no, that's not okay, and some guidance. So, like I said, if the child's about to put their hand into the fire or pull the cat's tail, you not only need to say no, but then you need to tell them what else they should be doing instead. Otherwise, you're
Right,
not
giving that
guiding them.
alternative.
Yeah. So you would then, for example, with the cat, say, no, you don't pull the cat's tail, sweetheart. This is what you do. You stroke the kitty from its head towards its tail like this. And you take the child's hand and you put it on the cat and you show it how to do that.
Mhm.
Okay. That's the healthy approach. So there is either, first of all, there's a recognition, so a spotting what's happening, and a response that is either positive, well done, sweetheart, right? Or whatever it might be. And so when the child does stroke the cat now, as opposed to pulling its tail, I hope that parent is going to say, well done, darling, you stroked the cat beautifully. How clever is that? Okay, and see the kitty likes that. So there you're endorsing the new behavior.
Right.
Right?
Let's talk
You're
about that
commissioning.
positive versus negative reinforcement and which has more power, because young children, toddlers especially, look for attention, whether it's good attention or bad attention. And
can I ask you to hold that, because I want to get there logically, but you're absolutely right. Let's just say children, humans, actually, all of us still want attention. And first prize is positive attention. We're herd animals, and we need to feel like we belong and are endorsed by the herd. And ideally, it's positive endorsement. That's what we all want. And that brings me on to the first thing that I really want to talk about.
Okay.
Because, like I said before, we start with the noticing.
Yeah.
And then, ideally, positive reinforcement, because that's what guidance is. Yes, more of this, no, less of that, right? Or you do it like this. So when the child is constantly responded to, and we are always responding to our children, but it may be that they're not healthy. Right? Now, we have to be normalized, socialized, trained to the particular world in which we live. So that's why humans are so adaptable, because our environment is constantly changing. In fact, we're constantly upgrading as a species as our knowledge expands. And so each generation needs still more information. So we have an awful lot to learn.
So we've spoken now
to what we do that the parent needs to be aware of. They need to notice and then respond appropriately, either with yes, well done, or no, do this instead.
So we've spoken now about what it looks like when a parent is guiding in a healthy manner, the positive reinforcement and all of that. Can we look at how mistakes are made by the guiding parent?
Yep. Okay, so we'll start at the beginning with neglect. Unfortunately, and I think COVID underlined this one so profoundly. I work, some of my clients are teachers, primarily in the primary school area, and I promise you, when those kids came back to school after COVID, those teachers were tearing out their hair because those children were unsocialized.
I was one of those teachers.
Okay.
You know, the pain.
The reason is simple. Those kids were exposed to massive degrees of neglect. Massive. And the reason was, I feel sorry for the parents who were expected to be able to take care of their kids while working full time from home. It's a nightmare. So I understand why it happened and how it happened, but it's far from ideal. Okay. And teachers are trained to be able to work with a bunch of children, and it takes training because it's not a simple job. And parents, I remember my stepdaughter being so glad when kids could finally go back to school physically. It was like, oh, thank God, right? Because it was so overwhelming for her. because you need it to be 3 people all at once, 2 different age group teachers plus the person doing the job, and then still run your nightmare stuff. Okay, so the problem with neglect is a failure to notice and therefore a failure to respond. So what happens is you do permission by default. In other words, if they're drawing on the walls and you don't do anything to stop it, you've said, well, okay, carry on drawing on the walls. So they do. And if they're smacking each other or pulling the cat's tail or whatever, and you're failing to respond, that's permission by default. They're not being taught that's not okay behavior. So it's not endorsed, but it's not discouraged either, and no alternative is provided. So this, if it's chronic, is what I refer to as the wild child. And believe me, if you were a teacher with the kids coming back after COVID, you had a classroom full of wild child.
Very, very wild.
So parents get busy. And if they don't understand, parenting is hard work. Let's not pretend that it's not. If you're doing a good job, when the kids are little, it is jolly hard work. And the terrible 2s and 3s are where some of the worst of this work has to be done, because the child is experimenting and they are starting to discover what's wrong, right, good, bad, yes, no. And if you don't respond, what you get is a lifelong wild child who doesn't have discipline. And what parents need to remember is that their job is to socialize their children. That's what kids have parents for, to teach their children how to function in the world. And failure to do that is unfortunately a really major failure on the part of the parents. All right. There are lots of reasons why people don't discipline their children. Okay? Often they can just be overwhelmed, too tired, or unfortunately not available because both parents are working crazy hours and you're leaving it to somebody who's either, too young to know what they're doing, doesn't have training or whatever. So in some countries, the children are left with a domestic servant, or they're put into a care place where people aren't qualified. So the children are looked after in terms of being fed and clothed and so forth, but they're not being socialized. There's no guiding parent role being performed by the people around them. And that's problematic. Something to be aware of when you're employing an au pair, for example, or looking for
a nanny
creche or an aftercare or a nanny and so forth. It's something very important to be aware of. Okay. But there are unfortunately other reasons why parents fail to discipline their children. And one of them is because they don't want their kids to be upset. They don't want their children to be angry with them. They want their children to like them. And so they won't say no to something because they might be unhappy.
So I have somebody that I'm very close to that has a little one, and she is becoming that parent. She doesn't want him to be upset, whatever he wants, like very much permissive parenting, like you said, the permission by default, right? If he cries because she said no, pretty much he gets what he wants. He pretty much is in control.
That's so sad, really, because
so sad.
Our job as a parent is to make our children fit to live in society. In other words, that other people will like them, not that they like us. Sometimes being a good and responsible parent means your kids won't like you. Okay? Because if you don't want to give them ice cream for breakfast, or you don't want to let them stay up until 2 a.m. playing with their toys if they've got school the next day and so forth, they're not going to like you. But it's still being done. And that's the identifier. Is what you are doing as a parent being done in the best interests of the child? And a responsible parent understands consequences the way a child cannot understand consequences yet, because their brain hasn't developed. So they're not able to make informed choices. They don't have the capacity. And that is your job as a parent, to make a wise and informed choice for the benefit of your child. But sometimes that's not going to make you popular with your kid. So stopping socially unacceptable or personally destructive behavior is a very, very important role parents need to fulfill. And yet, sometimes their kids are not going to like them for it. But failing to do so is definitely negative parenting, and it has some horrible long-term consequences for the child.
Right. And it also sets the child up for difficulty in controlled environments such as the classroom, which is inevitable
Correct.
for a child, right?
Yep. I sometimes
I
wonder,
see that.
Taryn, I sometimes wonder if homeschooling is sometimes being done for the wrong reasons. In other words, they're actually putting off socializing their children because we are supposed to be able to be cooperative in society. And I wonder sometimes if, yeah, that's a conversation we can have for another day, but
That
it does
social
concern
aspect
me.
is imperative. It's so
Yeah,
important because you cannot go through life not socializing. Like you have to deal with people at some point.
correct. And actually, it's very necessary for children to learn how to interact with others successfully and effectively. And the classroom is a good environment, provided it's, that the teacher knows what they're doing. It's actually very necessary. We have to learn how to function in society. And that is why children naturally move out of the home and have done for eons once they're old enough to play outside. So by the time they're at the age of about 4 or 5, they need interaction with other children. They need to start interacting with a peer group. But let's get into the parenting thing in another aspect, because we've spoken about neglect, which is a failure to respond, and specifically to fail to respond with a no to unacceptable behavior.
So what are some other ways that neglect will show up as?
Oof. Well, the next problem is if they don't say what to do instead. So if the parent says, stop doing that, whatever that is, and they don't offer the child an alternative, the child has no idea what to do instead.
I
So,
speak about this in my coaching course as well, that I tell parents that they need to ask for what they want instead of telling the child not to do a thing. So if a child's jumping on the couch, instead of saying stop jumping on the couch, saying, can you please jump on the floor? So asking for what they want, because the jumping is not wrong. Children need to expel that energy, and it's age appropriate for a child to want to jump. But if the couch is an inappropriate place to jump, tell them instead where they can do the jumping.
exactly. So this is where you set the child up for failure, because they now get the message. If you say, stop that, they don't know what it is that they're doing wrong. So they then think potentially jumping is wrong. When in fact, as you say, nothing wrong with jumping. So I still have this hideous memory of this, well, I won't call her a friend, but acquaintance of mine, watching her give her child the hiding of his life when he was, I think he wasn't even 4. Don't you ever hit your little brother again. How was this child supposed to know what else to do? I'm going to go into hitting in more detail later on, but he wasn't being shown what else to do when he got annoyed with his little brother, right? Because his mother was showing him by her actions to do this, while her mouth was telling him something completely different. And so what you got is huge cognitive dissonance and complete confusion in this child, right?
It's again that do as I say, don't do as I do. So I'm telling you not to hit your brother, but what I'm doing is hitting you. So there's that modeling again. You're modeling a behavior, but you're telling a child not to follow that behavior.
Right. So to be effective, the parent needs to injunct the behavior. And that often means physically, in the terrible twos, that's it. You never get to finish the sentence, and then you're up and down like a yo-yo, constantly stopping the child physically, right? Because trying to have an abstract conversation with a 2 or 3-year-old is futile, right? Take them somewhere away from their little brother and go, I know it's really annoying when your brother keeps pulling your hair, but he's too little to understand he's hurting you, right? And you may not hurt him back because that's not fair. He doesn't understand he's doing this. But you can say, ouch, every time he does this, and take his hand away from your hair and then move away, right? And maybe don't get so close that he can pull your hair, right? He will grow out of it, but not at the moment. And smacking him isn't the answer, right? He doesn't even understand he's hurt you, so he won't understand why you hurt him. So don't do that. Okay, so come away. If he's pulling you, take his hand away and move away. Now you've told him, if this is going to happen, rather do this. Stay a
Yeah.
little bit away. Okay? And unfortunately, especially in that age, when they're young, there is no abstract capacity. So you have to show them and show them and show them, because they also don't have much memory at that age. So they
Right.
don't remember. I remember my child banging his head repeatedly because he was a tall child, right? And he kept walking into the edge of the table because he couldn't remember, because their memories aren't developed at that stage. And so he kept thumping his head. Eventually, he looked like a unicorn. He had such a huge horn on his head, sort of
Shame.
bumping himself in the same place. And it was like, I had to be super vigilant.
Yeah.
And it was exhausting. I must tell you, I got very fit running after that child at that stage.
But I think even as adults, Marion, like we have these expectations of children to remember things like that. Like, remember that you're taller when you walk here, you're going to bump your head. But then there's a human like me that's clumsy by nature. I know where my bed frame is, but I can't tell you how often I bump my knee on this bed frame because I'm not thinking or my mind is somewhere else. So we have an expectation of children to remember a thing or to act a certain way. But as adults, we often can't get it right ourselves. And it's because we're human. And that's the underlying thing, is that we're human and we need to give ourselves grace to be human and
Yeah.
give our kids grace to be human as well.
Well, look, what you're talking about is realistic expectations. And one must also remember, and I have to remind people of this all of the time, that 80% is an A. So they're still going to get it wrong 20% of the time, and that's still in a school environment, in a university environment, whatever. 80% constitutes an A. So realistic expectations are essential. The other thing is, I know it sounds a bit strange when I've told you that a child that's young can't understand abstract information, but it is still important to explain the why. Okay, and it's a pattern that parents should get into. Because I say so is not a reason.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really important to teach children that there should be a reason for why they do what they do. Okay, so actually, as a parent, even if you don't explain it to your child, you need to be able to explain it to yourself why you're doing what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So when you respond, you should know why you're responding. And it should sound reasonable if you were to explain it to another person in the room. Because otherwise, you'll probably find there isn't a logical reason other than that's what was done to you.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's not always a good reason to be doing it again to the next generation. Okay, but it's important to start teaching deductive reasoning and consequence to children from very little, because as an adult, you want them to learn, if I do this, then that will happen, so maybe I shouldn't do it.
I think that
Right?
also aids in accountability,
Mm-hmm.
being able to acknowledge when you did a thing that you're not supposed to do.
Mm-hmm. So we've been talking about failing to respond, and we've been talking about failing to show an alternative when we're putting in an injunction, as saying no to something. But one of the other things that can happen, and that's really, really sad, and unfortunately I think happens far more than people realize, is to fail to endorse or permission good behavior. As I said earlier, indifference, that absence of praise, means the child that gets the message that their behavior is no particular importance, which is fine if it's the truth. But if it's behavior you want to see repeated, and especially if it's a new alternative behavior to something that you've just corrected, that you've guided them to learn, like stroking the kitty from head to tail instead of pulling its tail, right?
Mm-hmm.
Encouragement is essential. So noticing the child getting it right is something I cannot stress enough. And parents often forget. They start taking stuff for granted. So they take the good for granted and they only notice the bad. Children, as I said, like every human, want attention. And if they're not going to get positive attention, negative attention is more valuable than no attention
No
at all.
attention.
So in effect, if you're only paying attention to the negative and you're not paying attention to the positive, and you're not responding to the positive, but you are responding to the negative, you're endorsing the negative. And parents don't understand why. I hear it happen all the time. And they keep on doing whatever it is that they're unhappy about. And I'm thinking, but have you ever caught your child doing something right? So that's a very important thing for parents to do. Lots of positive attention. Let's take an example. I always like to come down to the practical.
Mm-hmm.
When a baby's learning to walk, you ignore the falls. You don't say to the child, what is the matter with you? How many times are you going to fall? What's your problem? How can you be so stupid? Now get up and walk. Can't you see everyone else is walking? Come on, get on with it. That child would never walk. We all know that. What do? We get wildly excited when they take their first few tottery steps. And we carry on being excited until they're cruising around the room. We get less excited, but we still get excited. And that's the point. So, like I said, neglect is indifference. And the opposite of love isn't hate, but indifference. So when children are neglected, when they're failing to get positive attention, they will go for negative attention. If that's what gets attention, sad, but anything's better than nothing. So as parents, catching your kids doing something right, and obviously age appropriately. So you're not going to get thrilled that a 12-year-old is walking. Okay? You get excited when they're 1. By the time they're 12, you can comfortably take that for granted. Mm-hmm. But if they've got themselves up and got themselves dressed for school and ready to go, and their homework's all done, and they've packed their school lunch and whatever, then you're going to get excited as a parent.
Right.
So it's obviously age appropriate, and age appropriate is something I think we've gone on and on and on about, but really you do need as a parent to notice.
Understand your child's developmental stage and age and what they have the mental capacity for. It's very important. So, Marion, we've covered quite a bit today on how
the time flies, doesn't it?
Right, it really does. So I think we can park it there for this week, and then next week just bite off another huge chunk of this to ensure that we give parents as much information as possible. Are you good with that?
Oh, look, I'm always happy to leave it where you feel there's enough, because I mean, we still have to look at, there's so much more. There's the crushed child, the rebellious child. In other words, how parents respond and where negative guidance can go wrong. So today we talked about neglect to notice, neglecting to respond with an injunction, neglecting to respond with a preferred alternative behavior, neglecting to praise. Those were all just neglect. Isn't that horrendous?
It's crazy. It's crazy. And again, it's stuff that seems so simple, but it's so often things that we overlook and doesn't come naturally to many parents because of how we were parented in the generations before that, because negative reinforcement and punishing for behaviors is how parents try to control behavior instead of trying to understand the child's behavior. And I think it's so important that we're doing what we're doing so that we can create this mindset shift for parents to actually understand their children as opposed to trying to control their children.
Well, I think constructive control is guidance, but it's to understand how it works, how it can go wrong, and why getting it right is so jolly important. And to recognize if your child is behaving in a way that isn't working, to stop and ask yourself these questions. Is there something I'm doing or failing to do that might be causing the problem? And as I said, one of the most common is parents saying to me, but my child keeps doing this, even though they know it's wrong. And I'm going, how much positive reinforcement are they getting? How much positive enthusiasm? And you'd be surprised. You see the look on their faces and they realize they've been taking the positive stuff for granted. So It's been a pleasure. But as I said, I keep thinking, oh my goodness me, I wish I'd had this information when I was a parent. I really do. So I hope it is going to help other parents going forward
Where can our
to
listeners, oh, sorry.
No, of course, go for it. Sorry.
No, I was just going to ask you, where can our listeners reach you? Can you give us your contact details again?
Yes, of course. Makepeace Integrated Wellbeing Coaching is a Facebook page that I have. I have a website, makepeacecoaching.com, and you can contact me via my email, marionmakepeace@gmail.com. But the big thing for me is actually, that's for people to work with themselves and deal with themselves as adults, because I don't work with children. I only work with adults who are trying to reparent themselves because of the damage that happened for them when they were children. But if they want help with parenting, please, they should be speaking to you.
Yeah, I'm that person.
And
Thank you.
there are books they can read as well, that Growing Up Again, Reparenting. But one of these days, I think you and I need to put a book together, don't you think?
I'm with it. I'm here for it.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you
Karen.
so much for joining us this week, and we'll chat to you again next week.
Thank you. Yep.
Thanks,
There's another
Marion.
whole chunk to worry about next week. Hey.
I'm excited.
All right. I look forward
Bye.
to it. Thank you. Bye for now.
Thank you for tuning into the parenting. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you have any questions, feedback, or content suggestions, please email us at Taryn@theparenting.com. Please remember to subscribe, like, share, and give my aunt a 5-star rating.